Now, as it relates to the gentleman's bipartisanship, the gentleman was quoted apparently just a few days ago about referring to our meeting. Our meeting, of course, dealt with a one-page recitation of 3 or 4 proposals, many of which are in the health care bill that we passed this House in one fashion or another. Notwithstanding that, of course, as you know, no Republicans voted for the bill. I was not surprised at that, frankly, because in February, apparently not based upon the specifics of a proposal, because that was specifics of a proposal were not on the table till the summer. Your campaign chairman, Pete Sessions, said Republicans told Republicans that they need to get over the idea that we're participating in legislation and ought to start thinking of themselves as an insurgency instead. He was quoted in the Politico, House GOP bullish at Virginia retreat, February 2nd, 2009, as saying that. Furthermore, Senator Jim Imhoff on the Hugh Hewitt show, 7/23/09, said, "We can stall it." And that's going to be a huge gain for those of us who want to turn this thing over in the 2010 election. Senator Jim Imhoff, as I said that. And then Senator Jim DeBent said, also in July of 2009, if we're able to stop Obama on this, referring to health care, it will be his Waterloo. It will break him. Very frankly, I tell my friend that I've discussed with him and with Mr. Blunt, my good friend, who was his predecessor and with whom he worked in the WIP organization, and asked him to participate with us. I did that early this year. I did it a little later in the year, sometime before I met with you as well, in trying to discuss was there a way forward to work in a bipartisan fashion. Unfortunately, that did not result in a bipartisan fashion. I will tell my friend on a smaller, more defined matter, the Children's Health Insurance Program, I spent about 100 hours trying to work with many on your side of the aisle to try to get, in the last Congress, to try to get bipartisan agreement on moving children's health insurance. And as I'm sure you recall, because you weren't with us on that issue, we couldn't get bipartisan agreement. So the answer to your question is I would like to have bipartisan discussions moving forward on this issue. But I have concluded from my experience over the last year, and not just these, I quote 3, but there have been many other statements as well, that indicate that opposition has been adopted, at least by some on your side, as a strategy and as a tactic. I think the losers are not so much Democrats in that context. I think the losers are the American people. They expect us and want us to work together towards resolving the issues that confront them, one of which is health care. They know it's an issue. I read the results in Massachusetts, but I will tell you I've also read the polls, which when asked not so much about a bill, but whether or not health care reform is needed in this country, a very significant majority of Americans respond they think it is. They think that when they're denied coverage for pre-existing conditions, that's a problem. They think when their child becomes 26 years of age, or now 23 years of age and out of college and doesn't have insurance, they think that's a problem. They think that when they have a very serious illness costing them thousands and thousands of dollars, that an insurance company telling them, sorry, your cost too much, we can no longer insure you, they think that's a problem. When they go deeply into debt for health care costs that aren't covered by their insurance company and have to declare bankruptcy and put their home at risk, they think that's a problem. So yes, I tell my friend that these are issues we would like to work together on, and we hope that can pass the jobs bill through this House in December. It's pending in the Senate now. We believe that would substantially move forward on creating jobs. It's not the answer, but it is one of the answers, we think. It focuses, as the gentleman knows, on infrastructure, which we think is a very important initiative that gets people working immediately, jobs here in America. We think that's very important. It also tries to help states so they're not laying off teachers and policemen and firemen. We think that's very important as well. But let me say something. I get a little confused, and perhaps these facts are not well known to you, but I thought I would remind you of these facts. We pursued an economic program that your party put forward from 2001 and 2003 on for 8 years. Now, while the people gave us the majority in the House and the Senate in 06, obviously President Bush threatened to, or did in fact, veto any changes that we made in economic policy. That economic policy, which you were a very strong supporter of, and your party was a very strong supporter of, you continued to mention jobs. So I want to make sure you know these statistics. In the last 3 months of the Bush administration, under the economic policies that not only did you pursue then, but you still want to pursue, because in fact the proposals that you have made essentially mirror the proposals that were made in 01 and 03. Those proposals were touted by you and others, I'm not going to go through all these quotes, as going to grow the economy, create jobs, and have a robust growth in our economy. In November and December and January, that policy which you pursued lost 2,019,000 jobs in 3 months. And we confronted the worst recession, the Great Recession, if you will, worse than at any time in 3/4 of a century. And it somewhat confounds me that you still, your party, not you necessarily personally, presents an economic policy which was the poorest job-creating administration 8 years since Herbert Hoover. An average of approximately 4,000 jobs per month. You need 100,000 just to stay even. Now, I will tell the gentleman, since the Recovery Act, which you nor your party voted for, since the Recovery Act, let me tell you what the last quarter was. Perhaps you know. We still have not succeeded in growing jobs. So we haven't had success. But we've had great progress. Let me tell you how much progress. Remember, I told you you lost, in the last 3 months, under your economic program, 2,019,000 jobs. The last quarter, we lost 208,000 jobs. Quarter, 3 months. That's way too many jobs. We want to be creating, as the Clinton administration did, on average 220,000 plus jobs per month. 22 million in total over 8 years. So that I tell my friend that when the gentleman says we haven't had progress on this, those figures, in my view, belie that assertion. In fact, we've made progress. Not only that, the stock market is up 60%. Had a couple of bad days. It's up 60% since we adopted the Recovery and Reinvestment Act. It had a minus growth under your economic policies during the 8 years of the Bush administration, minus to the extent it decreased in value, so that the investment I had in 2001 was about 26% less valuable in December of 2008. Contrast that to the Clinton administration. In its 8 years, the value of your stock portfolio or investments went up 226%. That's a 250% difference. So I tell my friend that we have taken very substantial action. We're going to take more action, because until we get Americans back on the job, till we get America growing so that it creates the kind of jobs our people need, and must have to support themselves and their family, we're not going to be satisfied. So yes, we passed a bill last month which you and your party voted against. We think that's unfortunate. And if you have ideas, I'd love to sit down with you again and discuss your ideas. Very frankly, however, some of the ideas we've discussed to date are some of the same ideas that, in my opinion, led to not such a robust, job-creating economy. In fact, as I said, the worst economy we've seen in 75 years. I yield back. I don't blame you at all for not wanting to look back in history. I wouldn't want to stand on that record either. But it's important to look at history so that we don't repeat the same mistakes, that the assertions that were made for the policies that you pursued of great growth and economic expansion, which did not occur, that's why I pointed out, because frankly your proposals mirror those that have been made in the past, and the premises that you have pursued are the same that you're pursuing now. It is instructive, I think, for the American people and for us who represent them to look at what worked and what didn't work. Your party unanimously opposed the Clinton economic policies. Mr. Army, an economist who was your majority leader, said that they would fail miserably. In fact, they succeeded mightily. They created those 22 million jobs that I said. In fact, in the last year when there was a slowdown, created 1.8 million jobs, as opposed to losing 3.8 million jobs under the last year of the Bush administration. I think it's instructive to see what worked and what didn't. So that is why I refer to it, not because I think that will solve our problems going forward. I agree with the gentleman. What is important is, what are we going to do now? But we would be fools, as the writer said, to continue to do the same thing and expect a different result. So I say that to my friend, when he asserts that we were in charge in 07 and 08, he and I both know that economic policy was not changed. Why? Because the President of the United States, who had the veto pen and the votes to sustain a veto, even when we tried to give 4 million children health insurance in America, that veto was sustained. They were not given that insurance until President Obama signed the bill, which was one of our first bills. So I say to my friend, looking back is useful only to the extent that you ensure that you do not repeat the mistakes of the past. The Clinton economic program worked, and the Bush program did not. And I want to tell my friend on his points for recovery, this so-called free recovery, supply-side recovery, if you will. One of the first things you want to do is stop the deluge of rules and regulations. Very frankly, I tell my friend, one of the reasons we faced such a crisis was the last administration took the referee off the field. And as a result of the referee being off the field, the players on the field went wild. And they did irresponsible things. And unfortunately, the taxpayer of this country, in order to prevent a Great Depression as opposed to a Great Recession, had to respond. The good news, hopefully, is that we're going to get paid back. Since made efforts to make sure that happens, and I hope, you hope, I'm sure, that we do get paid back. You want to block tax increases and cutting taxes. We cut taxes for 95% of Americans, as I'm sure you know, in the Recovery and Reinvestment Act. You want to freeze investment in items like job training, infrastructure, and education to rein in deficits and debt. You want to freeze investments in giving people new skills so they can get the jobs that are being created. We don't think that's good policy. Your program says you want to reform the unemployment system by requiring people to participate in job training. We agree with that, but you have to make sure that the job training is available to them. Approving the free trade agreements, as the gentleman knows, I'm a supporter of the free trade agreements. I don't think it would create those 250,000 jobs tomorrow or the next month or the month after, but I agree with the gentleman that that's a good policy. It's controversial policy, I say to my friend, as he well knows, on both sides of the aisle. You want to reduce tax barriers that inhibit domestic job creation. The Recovery Act, as you know, had tax cuts for small businesses. to do exactly that. Your side didn't support that. We also addressed the housing crisis by giving, address the housing crisis by giving regulators incentives to deal responsibly with banks and their borrowers. However, as I pointed out earlier, in fact, and the history shows that, regulation and oversight and the referee being on the field was a policy that the previous administration thought got in the way. Well, I think the referees that get in the way of the game are not useful, but referees that make sure that people play by the rules are essential. Yield back. We're talking about policies that you want to replicate that have been pursued. That was my point. It remains my point. I think it is a valid point. Did your policies work? You can argue all you want that you will say the Bush administration policies all worked. You have not in any way said the figures I have said on this floor, not only today, but you've had many opportunities to look to see whether I'm accurate on those figures, are wrong. In point of fact, they did not produce what you said they were going to produce. We need to adopt policies that did produce. The reason I compare the Clinton administration and the Bush administration is because under the Clinton administration, you said the policies wouldn't work. I don't mean you personally, but your party said the policies wouldn't work. In fact, it's the only administration, not the Reagan administration, not the first Bush administration, certainly not the second Bush administration, that produced surpluses. After 8 years, they had a net surplus. No administration in your lifetime has had a net surplus after 8 years other than the Clinton administration under the economic policies we pursued then. Not one. So from that perspective, not a question of failure, but I will tell you here, and again, these statistics you don't like, you'd prefer that I simply looked at the problems that we're confronting now. Why are we confronting these problems? Because your economic program did not work and plunges us into the deepest recession we've had in 75 years. Now, I raise my voice only because you simply ignore that. You say that's just carping. You say, oh, we don't want to look at what happened. We don't want to look at what our policies produced for 8 years. We want to look in the future. We do too. And what we wanted to do and what we have been doing, as I pointed out to you, is trying to bring this economy out of the ditch in which we found it, in which the American people feel very stressed, properly so. So we've got to get them back to jobs. And the first thing we had to do was to stop losing so many jobs. Again, I report the last 3 months of the Bush administration, we lost 2 million jobs. The last quarter, last 3 months, we've lost 200,000. Way too many, but 1/10 of what your policies produced or did not produce in the last 3 months of the Bush administration. That's so what, you say. Let's not repeat those mistakes. Let's invest in our future, which is what we did in the Recovery and Reinvestment Act. And Mark Zandi says that we saved over 1 million jobs. 1.6, I believe, is what Mark Zandi says, that we would have lost had we not passed that bill. So did it work perfectly? It worked better than the policies we were pursuing, frankly, that we inherited. That's my point. I think it is a valid point. If the gentleman disagrees with my figures, I'm be glad to be corrected. I think they're accurate.
I thank